You've seen his face on masks worn by the internet hacking group Anonymous, Occupy protesters, and even people who stormed Capitol Hill. You might even know this image of rebellion was based on the drawings by David Lloyd and the Alan Moore penned comic V for Vendetta. But do you know his name? This iconic mask didn't fall out of the sky. So what is the history behind the face that gives Warner Bros. A cut every time a mask is sold? What is the story behind what sparks fear in the heart of every IT team when 4chan hacks them? Who was Guy Fawkes, and why do the British people use fireworks to celebrate his death every year on the 5th of November? Well, it's time to learn how history works as we investigate how this man was pivotal in the shaping of a nation. Cast your mind back to the time of Henry VIII, King of England, until 1547. As you're probably aware, he had more divorces than a Hollywood movie starlet, but when he kicked the bucket, it was more than the will that caused the rifts between his offspring. His siblings were, through his many wives, all half-siblings. This meant claims to the true monarch were contested and annulled, mostly along the lines of which faith the kingdom should adopt, Catholicism or Protestantism. This tug-of-war had seen many burnings and oppression by both sides, so the score was far from settled by the time Elizabeth I took the throne, now as the Queen of Ireland too. She once again course-corrected the country onto Protestant rule. But to the north where her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, ruled over, you guessed it, Scotland, things were a bit different. Though the land was Protestant, Mary was a Catholic, yet tolerant and moderate to the religious settlement, but perhaps that was because she had bigger plans. A plot was hatching to remove Elizabeth and put Mary in power where Catholics would have more sway. However, that plot was revealed, and Mary finished a 19-year prison term with a beheading. Her son, James VI, became the head of Scotland, yet wasn't a staunch Catholic like his mother. However, in a rather ironic twist of fate, he would become ruler of England. Queen Elizabeth I was famed for her virginity, so she offered no heir to the throne. As her years dwindled, many in her court privately worked to streamline James's succession as ruler. After all, he was the Queen's first cousin once removed, and the great-great-grandson of Henry VII. He was the closest thing to a direct lineage. James became king over the three realms and created a union of the crowns, the country of Scotland and the country of England and Ireland, and began laying down the groundwork for Great Britain whilst ushering in the Jacobean era. But after inheriting a legacy stained with blood and religious sects, James had ambitions of unification. They included a master plan of establishing a permanent union of the kingdoms under one monarch, one parliament, and one law. Quite the progressive. Yet this was met with opposition because it meant that to a degree, each of the two countries would lose some independence. The Commons even invoked legal grounds as the refusal to grant James the title of King of Great Britain. Undeterred by the setback to the project, he assumed the title by proclamation rather than statute. What this proved, though, was that when the king didn't get his way, he was prepared to resort to royal prerogative rather than politics. This proved power would always be with the monarchy, not a move towards democracy. But in lieu of completely achieving his aims of a full union, Parliament was prorogued, meaning the government was convened for lawmaking, and so the stage was set for Guy Fawkes to instate the Catholic monarchy he dreamed of, or so he hoped. Now that you know the political backdrop, it's time to talk about Guy Fawkes, or as his Spanish comrades called him, Guy Fawkes. Born in 1570 to a York family who followed the faith of the Church of England, the church Henry VIII set up to make it possible to divorce. But when his father died, his mother subsequently remarried to a Catholic family. Here is most likely the start of Fawkes' devout conversion, though it probably took off when he attended a school whose headmaster had spent 20 years in jail for recusancy, the now-defunct crime of staying loyal to the tenets of Catholicism by not converting to the Church of England. After education and service for viscounts, Guy entered the military, where he joined Catholic Spain in its fight against the new Dutch Republic. This was despite the fact that England and Spain were still technically at war. In fact, it was only 4 or 5 years before his signing up that the Spanish Armada tried and failed to invade England. The mission back then had been to overthrow Queen Elizabeth I and her establishment of a Protestantism rule, which just goes to show how the sectarian tension was continental, yet Fawkes' loyalties were celestial. He even served under Sir William Stanley, a traitor who was once held in high regard by the Queen of England, but then switched sides to serve Spain. It was during this time that Guy Fawkes would write in his memorandum on how he considered James I a heretic who intended to have all of the papist sects driven out of England. Initially, James seemed to be carrying part of his sternly Catholic mother's light, but as Catholics came to defend regicide, his own patience waned. Then his own wife Anne, who had been raised Lutheran, was sent a rosary from Pope Clement VIII, which triggered James to exile all Jesuits and other Catholic priests. After, he recomposed the collection of anti-Catholic finds, making it clear that he did not wish to follow in his mother's religious footsteps. During all of this, Guy Fawkes was already a religious fanatic, but these new developments added fuel to the fire. His white-hot theology had primed him to be recruited by a terrorist cell. At the age of 33 or so, Guy Fawkes joined what is now known as the Gunpowder Plot. It was a conspiracy of assassination involving a group of English Catholics led by Robert Catesby, who, ironically enough, had married and bore children with a Protestant. But his familial ties didn't stop him from hatching a plan to remove the king and impose a Catholic leader on the throne. Their plan, in short, was to remove James and coronate his daughter as the leader, a context that would be primed with unrest in the Midlands. It was ambitious, but Catesby already had some experience in clandestine activities, having taken part in 1601's Essex Rebellion, which was an unsuccessful attempt to oust Elizabeth I. In the end, the Queen spared his life in exchange for a hefty fine of 4,000 marks, which in 2008 would have been £6 million. Soon after that, Catesby organized a mission to Spain to urge Philip III to launch an invasion, although this Catholic king of Spain was intent on peace with James. So perhaps it would be the third time the charm for treacherous Catesby. He met with a previous co-conspirator, Thomas Wintour, and 2 other men at his house to discuss the Gunpowder Plot. All he needed were barrels of gunpowder and men who shared his vision. But Guy Fawkes wasn't recruited until after, when Wintour traveled to Flanders, Belgium, to try acquiring Spanish support once again. Guy Fawkes' reputation as a soldier and dedicated Catholic preceded him. He was even rumored to have been part of the initial Spanish invasion delegacy. And so Wintour returned, not with Spain's support, but with right-hand man Guy Fawkes. They were now on a collision course with history. The first 5 co-conspirators had their first ever meeting on the 20th of May, 1604, probably at the Duck and Drac Inn, the usual residence of Thomas Wintour while staying in London, although it does not appear that the public house is still around. The plotters took a private room and swore an oath of secrecy on a prayer book. In a twist of fate, or perhaps divine intervention, a friend of Catesby's father, John Gerard, was in the next room celebrating Mass, so the 5 men received the Eucharist. No doubt this bolstered their religious belief that the regicide was a justified way to reinstate Catholicism. But from here on out, things would not go according to plan. From here on out, Catholic guilt would slowly take hold. The men believed they had until February of next year to finalize their plans. Thomas Percy, a plotter who had the tendency to rely on his sword and personal courage, was appointed by his employer, the Earl of Northumberland, to the Honourable Corps of the Gentlemen at Arms. Basically, to be one of 50 personal bodyguards to the king. This happenstance gave them an inn, a cover story, and also gave him justification to set up base in London. Now the terrorist cell had a place to live and plot, all while hiding under the monarch's nose. It was too good to be true. Gradually, they started storing gunpowder, even being able to ferry it conveniently between the base and Catesby's lodging, located on the other bank of the Thames. But as the plan grew, so did the team. Robert Keyes was hired, a desperate man, ruined and indebted, as was Thomas Bate, a servant who stumbled into the plot. And as delays to opening the government and fears of plague prolonged the operation, 3 men would be added to the ranks. Then the team came to acquire an undercroft, a sort of underground alcove for merchants to store materials beneath the House of Lords. It was a perfect place to detonate their explosives. Then in October, the details of the plan were finalized. Guy Fawkes would light the fuse and then escape across the Thames, whilst the simultaneously revolt in the Midlands would ensure the capture of the king's daughter Elizabeth, named after James's predecessor. However, the fear of death of innocents, especially innocent Catholics, was spreading in the group. Would it forsake them to hell? Would their souls be spared? Would God forgive them? Some of the group said yes, but others had doubts. Someone wrote an anonymous, somewhat coded letter to William Parket, 4th Baron Monteagle, the brother-in-law of Tresham, one of the plotters. In it, Monteagle was warned to stay away from Parliament that day, but the cryptic nature made it unclear exactly what it meant. The letter was passed around until it finally landed in the hands of King James I on November 1st. He immediately seized upon the word's blow and felt it hinted at some stratagem of fire and powder. A secret party was sent out to search the Houses of Parliament at once. By the 3rd of November, Thomas Percy told his colleagues about the betrayal letter, though no one was overly concerned. They felt their plan was safe, even with Tresham the likely whistleblower. However, the next day, 4th of November, the king's men found Guy Fawkes stacking firewood in the undercroft. He said it belonged to his boss, Thomas Percy, and they went to investigate, only to discover Percy's history of being a Catholic agitator. By the time they returned to apprehend Fawkes, he had gone. Not to be fooled, King James ordered one more thorough search. And so it was late that night that Guy Fawkes was discovered amongst the 36 barrels of gunpowder with matches and torchwood in his possession. Guy Fawkes was dragged before the king early morning of 5th of November. The gunpowder plot had been uncovered, the threat was over, and through his ensuing tortures, the rest of the plotters would be captured, arrested, tried, and executed. Their heads were put on a spike for the public to see what becomes of traitors and to stand as a reminder of how a coup almost jeopardized democratic foundations and threatened the unification of the lands. Guy Fawkes wasn't the ringleader, but he was the triggerman who was just moments away from lighting the fuse that would have ended the nation as we know it. And so it is that every year, on the 5th of November, the British celebrate this brush with tyranny by igniting gunpowder in the form of fireworks. Some even parade scarecrow effigies of Guy Fawkes before burning him at the stake. But the simplest way the Brits remember how close the terrorists came to winning is with a simple nursery rhyme. Remember, remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and a plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Guy Fawkes, 'twas his intent, to blow up the king and the parliament. 60 barrels of gunpowder below, poor old England to overthrow. By God's providence he was catched, with a dark lantern and burning match. Holler boys, let the bells ring. Holler boys, God save the king. Historians are not sure who sent the letter to betray the group, and it's still a mystery to this day. If you want to learn more about a man who should probably be celebrated with fireworks, go and watch our video on how Stanislav Petrov saved the world from World War III. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how history works.